Okay, we're going to get started. Hi, I'm John Waldman. I'm the president of Fluid Mechanics, and today we're want to welcome you, first of all, to FM Facebook Live. It's our first presentation, and we're looking forward to seeing how everything goes with everyone here. The first thing that we're going to do is go over a little information and give you a little bit about what Fluid Mechanics does. And then once we do that, we're going to dig deep into the program itself, which is called generating force. So let's get started here. The first thing we want to do is take a look, and we want to know the difference between competitive swimming and high performance swimming. So in competitive swimming, basically you join a swim team, you may learn four strokes really, and join a swim team and then race. But the difference between a competitive swimmer and a high performance swimmer is a high performance swimmer is using swimming as a vehicle to get somewhere. So they're either, for instance, using it to win the next big race, to go to college and swim possibly, to travel, to become famous, things like this. And so there's a big difference between a competitive swimmer and a high performance swimmer. They're both in the same pool at the same time, and the coach is coaching both of them. But when we look at it, they're using it for something very, very different. One is more social, if this makes sense, and kind of they're enjoying the fact they're on a team. And the other one is really trying to use it and get somewhere with it. Competitive swimmers don't really need us. Or high performance swimmers, they absolutely need us. And you're going to find out why today. So one of the things we want to know is what Fluid Mechanics does differently than maybe a coach or something like this. So what we have, and I was speaking with some folks the other day about this, was we act as a conduit between science and the pool. So we have scientists that research information on swimming, kinesiologists, exercise physiologists, things like this, and they do the research. But a lot of times they're not necessarily great communicators, and our job is to go from there, because when it gets to the coaches level, that research, sometimes it's not that understandable, and especially on how to apply it. And a lot of times the coaches don't have enough time to sift through all the data that's coming out and see how does that work for my swimmers, right? And then getting it down to the pool where the swimmers are in the pool training, right, and following directions, things like this. They're training and they're racing. So our job is to get it from the scientists and decipher and interpret which things are most important, and let's see, which things are most important, and how are they getting from the scientists down to the swimmers. So we're going to interpret it and present it usable new ideas, if that makes sense. So let's go ahead and get started from there. So we close that gap and bring it in a visual fashion. We're going to show you right now. So right now you can see actually right here, we're sending you a visual signal. That's the area right there. You get 60% of all your propulsion. So when you push in swimming, you push back like this, that's going to drive you forward and get you the most movement forward, if that makes sense. Okay. From there, the next step is, let's see here, we're going to go over here, and we're going to look over and see that we're very successful in what we do, because only about 2% of all athletes that compete in high school athletics go on to actually compete in college. Whereas on top swim teams, about 16%, so almost 8 times that. FM swimmers do about 89% over the last 30 years or so, since we've been consulting from 1989. 89% of our swimmers go on to swim in college. So if you want to go on to swim in college or represent your country internationally, FM is a place to be. And we have a list here of all kinds of different tools that we use to enhance swimmers' performance, and they're specifically designed to target to help the swimmers get forward and move into the direction that they need to make that improvement. Now, one of the reasons that we're starting to really see major improvement is the system that we use. And the system we use has 4 steps. It's called Learn It, fix it, cement it, and use it. So on the first step, you learn something new. And then, right, this is called the developmental pipeline. And what it says here is endless laps aren't the solution. And you've probably already recognized that going back and forth in the pool is going to be very different than getting new knowledge that you can apply inside there. So learn it is where you're going to learn something new, and then you're going to fix it. So you're going to match your actions to what you now know. The third step is to cement it by doing it over and over and over again. And you normally do that back in practice. And then you go and you use it in a race. So let's go ahead and see what the average competitor does. The average competitor, we think, is headed for a plateau. And the reason why is they only use 2 steps. They cement it in practice by doing it over and over again, and then they go to a race. Now think about in your own practice what happens, right? In your own swimming world, do you go to practice and practice and practice, then you go to race, right? And you go back to practice, and you didn't learn anything new necessarily. You're just starting to cement in the same thing over and over and over again. And then you go and use it. Eventually you get good at whatever it is, whether it's the right thing to do or not. You get more familiar with it, you do it more frequently. And then that's what cementing is. And then you go use those same things. Eventually you're going to hit a plateau. Now, where fluid mechanics comes in, again, bringing you new information, like we saw back here, right? And are transitioning it from the scientists down to the swimmers and applying that science of swimming as it grows, right? So we help you learn something new. And after you learn it, then you start to correct it. Then you go back to your swim team with new information, and you can do a lot more. Again, one more time, going back here, and we can see we're sending you that visual message. Now, if you push harder in that area and freestyle, you'll move faster. That's a law of physics. So practicing to get faster would take a lot longer than just understanding I need to push back hard at the back of my stroke, and that'll push me forward more. Okay, so now we're going to go over here, and again, so this is what we do differently is we add these 2 steps for your swimmer. They'll learn it, they'll fix it, and they go back to the swim team and they cement it and use it. So today, we're going to be on the green step here, where we're learning something brand new. And at the end of the session, you can see if that's really something that's going to be beneficial for you as a swimmer. And I think it'll be tremendously beneficial, because we're going to be using laws of physics, and one of the principles we're going to be using was a discovery of the decade by Dr. James Councilman, and it has to do, it's considered to be the most significant impact on swimming that there is. Okay, so first I want to orient you as to where we are in our system here, because we've got a system that it wants to be applied, and you want to know where you are while you're applying it. So there's 5 dimensions, and each dimension in a freestyle, if we're looking at a freestyle, is going to have 5 different dimensions in it. The first dimension is called structure. It's like a blueprint, basically, for the stroke itself. So we say A stands for arms, H for head, T for torso, and L for legs. A0, right, is when your arm's out of the water. A1 is when it's going forward, right? So this would be A0. If you can see this right here. And then A1 is when it goes forward towards that glide. And then you go into A2, called the gather. That's when we're starting in the beginning in front of our head, right? And then A3, right, so we're in the water here. A3, we're trying to press it back, going under what's called the xiphoid process, where your chest breaks into your stomach. And then A4 is where you're pushing back at the end of the stroke. And as we learned in the picture before, that A4 provides 60% of all the propulsion. A3, about 18. So that's about 78% of all the propulsion right there, right? But we learn that when we get to 4. So first we just box it out so you can see the different pieces. Then we go down to dimension 2 when we learn the hydrodynamics and what happens between you and the water, and that relationship that's so important right here. This is a tremendously significant aspect of swimming, right, is the hydrodynamics, how you relate to the water, because that's what you're pushing off of to get you down the pool. The next one is going to be here. We're going to start to work on force. And force is basically telling you why you're doing what you're doing. Right? It's the purpose. And so if you're in A0, what's the purpose of A0 versus A1, etc.? So actually A0, just so you know, in this stroke, A0 is setup. It's getting ready. So it's not actually force. A1, however, down here is where you apply the force. That's called momentum. So it's a specific type of force. A4 is mainly propulsion. That's gets a lion's share of the propulsion. Now here, the next dimension, which is dimension 4, is where you now have the timing. So if one arm's in A0, where should the other arm be? Or where should the head be, or torso? So it's telling you where things are in relationship to each other, depending on the time. And on the last one here, we're going to have what's called blending. And blending is where you put it all back together and make it work together. So it's the relationships about force and timing, right? And how timing actually impacts force, and how that causes a difference in your hydrodynamic relationships, and how you want to actually structure that stroke to make it better. So today, we're going to be zooming in on dimension 3. And we're going to learn how to generate force. And that's what this program's all about. So let's get into the topic and get started here. So there we have, one of the first things you want to know is the difference between motion and movement. So motions are the things you do with your body parts. So if I move my head like this to take a breath, that's called motion. If I move my arms like this, that's called motion. If I move my torso, motion. If I move my legs or my hands or my fingers, it's all motion. Movement is you passing through the pool. Right? So we're going to trade our motion for movement. One more time, we're going to trade our motion for movement. And the idea is to get less motions, like less units of motion, and more movement per motion. So less motion and more movement. It's like you get a bigger paycheck, if that makes sense, for every time you work. So now we're going to talk about movement. Again, remember, motion versus movement. Movement is you passing through that pool, right? Total movement is your working movement, which is, let's say I'm pushing back in A4 like we were talking about. Am I moving because of A4? Absolutely, I'm moving right there. As I'm pushing, I'm moving. Okay, so now the total movement is working movement. So while I'm working to get that movement, and then residual movement. So residual movement is the movement you get after you stop pushing. So if I'm in A0, is my body still moving forward? Yes, it is. Is it moving forward from what I'm doing in A0? No, because I'm not even pushing on the water, but it's actually, right, I'm moving forward because of what I did in A4. So it's continuing on, okay? So that's really important to understand. So you got working movement and residual movement, okay? And that equals total movement. Okay, so let's move to the next step. So now we have what's called motion lines versus force lines. All the lines in the pathway are motion lines. Okay, some are filled with force. So force lines, we have force lines and we have force arrows. Okay, and in the force lines and the force arrows, we have at the end of the force arrow, we have what's called a delivery point. So if I stop there, I'm actually going to get a delivery point and start to move forward. Again, so we have a force line, force arrows, and so if, let's say my arm's moving in in A3, that's a force line. A4 is a force arrow because you're going to finish there. A3, A4, and that has a delivery point. And that's a big deal because that transfers the force at that point. Okay, so now we're going to go into force, the color, okay? So we're going to show you exactly what these colors are all about. So this is the color key. And before I do, I'm going to go over here and I'm going to show you how these strokes work. So you can see the color coding right there. And what we're going to learn is what that color coding is about. And we can see that in a different style of freestyle, for instance. Right here, this is a sledgehammer freestyle, which is a different style of freestyle. And then we can see it further in what's called the windmill freestyle. You can see all the color coding here showing you how to apply more and more force. Okay, here's force. We had backstroke. Now we have butterfly. And then we're going to have the 5 styles of breaststroke. That's flat breaststroke. And you can see how that differs from European breaststroke. And then dolphin action breaststroke, where they go down and back up. You notice I'm going down and back up. And then here, very good. This is called the scoop and shoot breaststroke. You see very different pull pattern as it pulls out and around. And then you have the wave breaststroke. And again, the color coding is quite a bit different in each one of those. So we're going to find out which ones apply best for each person as we do that. Okay, very good. Okay, so here's our force key. So black, if you're looking at a black line, it's called black line of structure. All right, that's just a structural line, kind of like a blueprint. And then we have green. Green is set up, so we're preparing. So we're setting up, getting ready, and then we're starting to, so we're taking our arm, we're getting ready, and then we're going to start to put on some force. And then yellow is momentum. So that's a force that's pulling us with it. So, right, it's a parallel force. So it's one of the 2 primary forces, and it's parallel. So if we're throwing it forward, we're going to try to go forward with it and have it pull us with it. Blue is a primary force that's opposing force. So that's going to be, I'm going to push against, right? Let's say I want to go forward, I'm going to push backwards, and then that way I'm going to move forward, right? So I'm going to use, maybe sometimes I'll use yellow and blue at the same time together. Then pink. Pink is a secondary force. That's like the torso, possibly, or the upper leg that's helping something else. It's not delivering primary force itself, but it's making whatever does deliver the primary force better. So if I'm getting blue back here, propulsion, I'm going to get more blue if I use my torso to help it, and that's pink against blue. Okay? And then we have purple. Purple is going to be intensity, which is muscular contraction. So if I'm pushing back here in the A4, as we mentioned, I would push back hard, I'd move forward. The harder I push, the more tensity I had in there. We have both static and active tensity, but that's a generator of force. That's inside all the forces causing the force. And then we have red, which is residual movement, which we all already discussed, is once you're doing that, you're gliding and getting the residual movement. And gray is what's called a waste or a lack. Right, so it's a lack of that force. So let's say I was supposed to be pushing hard back here, but I wasn't. I just kind of let my hand carry back. Guess what? In that case, I wouldn't get that propulsion to move forward. Okay, let's go ahead and we will move forward from here. Now we're going to talk about clean versus dirty motion. So clean motion, right, is when you're, let's say you're putting your arm out in front, you're going to try to glide, right? You push it like this, then it's going to be straight out like this, and it doesn't want to move. That's clean motion. Dirty motion is where I get out there and I do what's called an out sweep, if I push out to the side, or an in sweep if I pull it in this way. Those are called dirty motion because I'm trying to deliver force forward. I don't want it to slip, if that makes sense. And all of a sudden some of the force goes this way or that way. I just want it to go straight forward and stop and then ride that. Now if I'm going back and forth like this, but with an out sweep and an in sweep, that's called a search. And again, you don't want to be searching if you can help it. Okay, because that, again, you can't really afford that. You want to deliver force, get in, and then get out. Okay, let's move on to the next slide here. And we're looking at this one, and it's called coiling to uncoil. So why do we coil? And the reason why we coil, which means to bend your elbow or bend your knee, the reason why we coil is so that we can then uncoil. So first you coil, and then you can uncoil. So we coil on strokes, like this and like that. We coil on and uncoil on turns when we push off the wall, and also when we push off start. So we're constantly coiling to uncoil. That's what generates that force. Okay, let's talk about the center of the coil. Now in the center of the coil, there's a decelerated buffer, which means you slow down, right? So we're slowing down, so we're going to decelerate in the center of the coil. So we're going to get here, we're going to slow down. The reason why we're slowing down is that we can then, when we speed back up, we have more range, right? And range enhances force. So it's a really big, important thing. Again, range enhances force. So this would be, for instance, too little coil. They're not coiling enough. That's going to reduce the opportunity to uncoil and decrease your potential for generating force. If you coil too much, you're going to do what's called stuffing the coil. And stuffing the coil means you coil it so tight that you can't move freely, and therefore you can't deliver much force through that either. Okay, let's go down into what's called an effective coil. So the right amount of coil reduces the impact on the flow of motion, right? So you're flowing well, you're able to deliver force, you're not stuffing the coil, and you've got enough room to actually coil, so you're getting a great uncoil, delivering a lot of force, and then you can ride that force. So it's very important when you're looking at, for instance, the avatars, you're trying to use that as a model, so you look and see how much coil they're getting, and try not to overcoil and tighten, and try not to keep it too far out, because you want to get as much coil as possible without getting impacted negatively in your motion. Okay, got it. So let's go to the next one here. And now we have a motion pattern breakdown. And motion pattern breakdown, we're going to dissect A4. Okay, so here's A4, right? And you can see I'm pushing back here in the bottom of the picture. See that? And you can see these little insignias here. I'll show you what those are. So the IP is the initiation point, right? And the TP is the termination point. That's where it starts, that's where it ends. So the initiation point, termination point. The MP1 is midpoint 1, midpoint 2, midpoint 3, 4, 5, and this is the CP, which is the center point, the very center of the entire motion. Okay, so these are normally in 3-inch cubes, but we can change them for what our needs are, which is how large they are. But generally, it's about a 3-inch cube that we're looking at. So we also have what's called an initiation barrier. So initiation barrier is this, out of that initiation point is the one end point, or the beginning point actually, of that as it passes into the IP, right? That just little slice right there. The termination barrier would be the end, right? And that's the barrier to the end of the control. And this is the IB is the barrier to the beginning of that control, okay? And the control is the motion, so that's what we call that motion. So you can see here, as the swimmer is pushing back, if they're going to accelerate to gain enhanced force, from the IP to the TP, there has to be a range. So let's say we started at the number 3, so we're moving at a speed of 3, and by the time we get back to the TP, on a scale of 0 to 10, we're now moving to 9. Our range is 9 minus 3, which is 6. That's a big range. So And then we're trying to get faster and faster as we go, and the reason why is that's going to drive us down the pool. Okay, so the more acceleration, the more enhanced force you get, and the farther you get driven down that pool. Okay, so let's take a look at the next one. In this case, we're measuring the speed, right? And we can measure the speed in each one of these compartments. The patterns of speed, right? We have a pattern of speed. Element of speed is, let's say, right here, if I just measure in 1 unit and it says 4, that's the element of speed. If I measure in 2, that's called a buffer. So let's say this one's 4 and this one's 5. We've measured a buffer. So it's about a total of 6 inches, 3 inches for each one, right? And it's starting to speed up. So we're seeing an accelerated buffer, all right? 4, 5, 6. That's now a pattern. 3 of them in a row or more is a pattern. And we see that it's accelerating 4, 5, 6. And it's accelerating linearly, right? It's in a line, 4, 5, 6. If it went 2, 4, 9, it would start to bend that line, and that acceleration would be called an elliptical acceleration, right? So as it sped up, it would kind of curve the line, and especially if we had more compartments, we could curve that line better. The more you curve it and the more range at the end, the more driving the swimmer down that pool. Okay, so this shows a swimmer coming in what's called A0 in the green section and into A1, right? So A0 is green, so it's set up as we talked about. It comes down into here, it slows down, right, as we're bending, and then drives forward. And as it drives forward right there, it drives all that force into there, right? And then the idea is to stop and to ride it, if that makes sense. Okay, so the section where you slowed down, that's called a moat, right? And so we're slowing down. We don't want to stop. We're slowing down, and then we speed up, and that drives force. So if I'm doing this in breaststroke, boom, like that. If I'm doing that in for instance, in butterfly or backstroke, and I'm pushing back, I'm slowing down right at the end, and boom, I'm exploding. That's where that decrease in speed in the beginning, right? And then you start to increase till the end. That's your range of motion. And if it's backloaded with the most increase happening at the end, you're going to get the more benefit from it. Okay. Now I'm going to put this in a package for you, so it's pretty simple. So that's the basics of the program. And so again, we're looking to be able to push backwards, start to get acceleration, drive ourselves down that pool. This is how to enhance it really easy. It takes all this information we just learned and puts it in a nice little package for you. So the first one is called direction. Make sure your force line is pointing in the right direction. So if I want to put my arm in A1, I want it to go straight forward down the pool from my shoulder. I don't want it to cross over. That's going the wrong direction. And all of a sudden, the more force I put in, the further I go in the wrong direction. So as I lift weights and things, I'm actually just enhancing the wrong direction. Okay, so we want to make sure it's pointing in the right direction. Then, on length, we're going to start earlier. So you want to lengthen it. So you start, instead of starting it out here and just having a short line, you pull it back and you have a longer line. So you lengthen that. Or you reach forward farther, and that's a longer line. So you can go for the IPN, which is initiation point where you start it, or the TPN, you could push it farther out. Right? And you can expand that line, and you can have more room to get range of speed, right? And that's going to give you more opportunity to build more force. After you've gotten it the right direction and you've lengthened it to the level you want to, then you start to tilt it. What tilting means, right, is you're going to progressively increase that speed. So you started off, okay, it's pointing in the right direction. Okay, I made it long, and now I'm going to start to get faster and faster and faster. So as I go down that line, faster and faster and faster, and that's going to drive me down the pool more. And then I'm going to bend the line. I'm going to make it what's called elliptical acceleration. So elliptical acceleration is where I start slow, finish fast, but in the middle, right, I start to push the speed back. So IP might be 3, TP might be 9, and if my CP center point is the middle of that, so right, maybe it's like a 5, for instance, 5.5, right in there. As I start to push back, if I move the 5.5 back to MP4, now I've got between 5.5 and 9 occurring back here. So I slowed the beginning down and sped up the end. As I speed up the end, I start to drive even more force, right? Or if I can push it even to like, right, 4, instead of going 5.5, I put 4 here, and then boom, it goes all the way up to 9. That's 5 points of acceleration at the end. That's huge, right? So that's where somebody's not just getting it faster point by point, but now they're getting to be more of like an artist working with science, right? And they're getting better at what they do. Okay, so direction, get it in the right direction. Length, lengthen it out so it's longer. You can tilt it, start slow, finish fast, right? And then you can bend that line. It's not the line itself, it's the line of speed. And then the last thing is to match it. So if A1 is going this way, what else can I do to help it? Maybe I can use my torso. Boom, and there's a line. So that's T1, pushing that. So torso 1. So if T1's there, now I can start to work on the same thing, get it in the right direction. Lengthen it, make it bigger in the right IP and to the TP. tilt it, right? Start to get it faster as it goes, and then you want to bend it. Slow in the beginning, fast at the end, right? And you do that. Then the same thing, I match that. I can match T1 to T0 on the other side, and it can help each other. And then I can match it to A3 and A4 on the other side. And I can use my blue lines, which are propulsion, to work with my yellow lines. So as you start to learn this and understand it more, I'm going to go back here. You can start to read into these lines. Right, so you can start to see, for instance, for this guy here, let's see, oops, I'm going to go over here for a second. Good, can you see that yellow line? The yellow line in front that's force, so you'd push hard through there. Can you see the blue lines back here? And the blue lines, again, you push really hard back there. So that's the idea, is to try to get those lines so you can really push hard in the areas that you need and you don't waste your effort. You see there's no yellow line in this one. This is a different style of freestyle. Actually, there's a little yellow line. I think that shouldn't be there. Right. But you see the acceleration in the propulsion back here. Right? Good. Here you can see the backstroke. There's no yellow in the backstroke because there's no uncoiling to move forward. It's mainly propulsion going backwards, enhanced by power, which is the pink. Now, A4, again, you can see as they push off these pressure fields, boom, like that. That's where you really get a lot of working movement, and then you want to get your body in the right position for residual movement, if that makes sense. Okay, great. Let me know if you have any questions here, and we can get started from there. Let's see here. Okay. Okay, great. And as you have questions, please feel welcome to connect with us. Please let us know, if you like the event, share it with someone that you know. They can get a lot out of it that you think might really benefit from it. Be sure to watch for our next FM Facebook Live event, and that should be coming up soon. And vote for your favorite topic. Remember to invite all your friends and teammates that can get a huge benefit out of it. And don't forget to visit our website at fluidmechanics.net to try out our animations and use the FM Discovery Center. We'll see you next time on FM Facebook Live. I'm going to be just taking one question here. What does the green line mean? So the green line means those are set up. They're getting ready. Okay? So these are just setting up and getting ready. So if you see the green in the feet and you see the green in the arms, they're setting up and getting ready for force. Here, again, you see them getting ready for force here in the front, and then you're going to gain propulsion as you push back like that. Okay. And if you have more questions, please send them in. You can always send them to swim@fluidmechanics.net. Thanks for your time.